Good evening, folks. My name is John Stewart. Welcome to what I confidently predict will be a lively and very interesting discussion of faith in action. A look at how Knoxville's faith community has responded to the challenges of COVID-19. Knoxville is a place that takes religion seriously. Most places of worship are essential elements in the lives of many, if not most, Knoxville families. Now, many of the established ways of religious practice have been seriously disrupted by the coronavirus. Yet, this is also a time when our religious faith can be vitally important, often essential, as we seek to navigate through these uncharted and frightening waters. Tonight, we have three of Knoxville's principal religious leaders to help us better understand these challenges, along with potential benefits that this radically changed religious landscape might produce. Reverend John Gill is the senior pastor of Church of the Savior, United Church of Christ. Rabbi Erin Boxt is the senior rabbi of Temple Bethel, a Reformed Jewish congregation. And Reverend Meredith Loftis is associate pastor at First Presbyterian Church downtown. Welcome, welcome to all of you. Now, maybe I'll have John kick this off, but let me ask you all a question. How have your respective congregations responded to the pandemic and the many, many restrictions that have been necessary? Or, to put it another way, are you guys still in business? John?
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll start off. Yes, we're still in business, although I have to admit it's been somewhat daunting. We're probably the smallest of these three congregations represented here. About 130 average worship on Sunday. And so we were doing some videotaping of our services very informally with a smartphone before this, so that it could be accessed for homebound people afterward. And we were working on getting streaming technology in place. But by the second week of this shutdown, we moved to streaming online, and it seems like every single week we've had a different system in place until we finally, I think, have settled down into a good system of video and audio for streaming online for Sunday worship. And we've had good attendance, I have to say, at those services, surprisingly to me. I mean, probably close to or better than we were getting before. And that's kind of been interesting for me. We've also been doing a ton of meetings via Zoom, the Zooming thing, the Zoom platform, both church meetings and some small group, social kind of group meetings and study groups, children's Sunday school, youth groups have all been meeting by Zoom. Those have been steadily attended, but not, I would say, not as well attended as they were before the pandemic hit. We've also reached out to everybody just via phone calls to see how people are doing, and just struggling to stay connected. So it's been daunting, but yes, we're still here. We're still active.
Alive and kicking, yes. Rabbi, what's been going on at Temple Bethel?
So I have to say, a couple of years ago, well, probably more than 4 or 5 years ago, I was introduced to Zoom in its early stages. So I've been using Zoom for long distance premarital counseling and such for a number of years. So for me, when this pandemic first hit, and it was, let's figure out a way that we can still gather with our community virtually, for me, Zoom was a simple solution. Of course, now there's so much more what we can do with Zoom. I joke that I wish I had bought stock in Zoom before the pandemic happened. But our congregation, when this first started, the president of the congregation and I met, and we talked about how we wanted to deal with the building. So originally it was, well, we're going to close down the building for a couple of weeks. We'll see how things are going. And then it became, okay, we're going to be closed for the rest of March. And then we're going to be closed for April. And then we're going to be closed for May. And now we're probably going into June as well, and if not beyond. So we've had to reschedule some life cycle events like bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies for our teenagers. I've had to do one in-person funeral during this pandemic, and I've been very lucky because many of my colleagues have been doing funerals constantly. And so I've been very lucky. I don't want to jinx myself. I don't know if I can say that, but I've been lucky in that respect. So we've had to, like John just said, we've done a lot of things with Zoom. We have a live Facebook Torah chat portion of the week on Tuesdays. We have our Friday night services every week. We have our end of Sabbath services on Saturday, Havdalah every week. We've now been doing a healing service every couple of weeks. And we've done our board meetings and our executive board meetings through Zoom. So the building is virtually closed to everybody except for staff and the executive committee. Although I will tell you that my guess is that nobody really is going to the building right now, except for the people that are cleaning it and sterilizing it and doing all the things that we need to do to get it ready for when we do open up, whenever that is. And it's been trying, as John said. For me personally, the hardest part is being a stay-at-home dad and a full-time rabbi. I find myself in some cases working harder and more now than I was before the pandemic. And so, it's about figuring out timing and how to balance the time. So that's been difficult. But again, to look at it in a positive note, how much time do we as clergy cherish with our families, or how much more do we want to be with our families when we're doing our jobs? Now that we're quote unquote forced to be with our families, it's really something that we should cherish.
Yeah. Meredith, you folks have a lot of members. Now, how do you handle that situation?
We are certainly still in business. We have been in business since 1792 and expect to be for a long, long time. So we have had 2 services for a long time. And so right now we only have 1. When we had to go into quarantining and isolation and lock down our church in the very beginning, we were not prepared. I'll be honest about that. We did not have any capability to video stream. And so for those first 3 Sundays, we were invited to come to Sequoia Hills Presbyterian Church and combine with them as well as with Fountain City Presbyterian Church and hold worship together. And that was very fun. It was great to be to work in partnership and collaborate, and each church was able to have a preacher from their church preach on a Sunday. And so that was wonderful. So in the meantime, we were moving from having audio streaming, which was barely used, to working on getting video streaming up and running. And so we have some really dedicated church members that helped us get that together very, very quickly. And so for almost the past month, we have been holding our own video streaming service from our sanctuary. So we have 10 people or less in a service. So I have our transitional senior pastor and me and our organist and 4 choir members, and we are socially distanced apart in the sanctuary. And a fun thing is that one of our members took photos of all of our other members and pasted their heads on the pews out in the congregation. So even though nobody is there, we have our friendly faces to look back at us. So that's been fun. We do have maybe a larger congregation. We have on average 250 in worship. And so to connect with that many people is a struggle at times. And so we certainly use Zoom. We do lots of Bible studies and Sunday school. We have a children's Zoom that meets on a regular basis. And so that's been really fun. It has been challenging for Some folks just because they've never used Zoom before or aren't as familiar with technology, but they've been really good sports and have often learned how to do it. We have shut down the building. We are not accessible at the moment, though we are committed to having our food pantry, our fish pantry continue to operate. So we are open once a month, and that was something that we have had to adjust to with social distancing, but we have able to continue to serve our neighbors around the community, even though our building is shut down. So we're proud to continue to do that. The last thing I'll mention is that we do a daily Facebook Live devotional, just using an iPhone. And so every day between Monday and Thursdays at 11:15, we offer a 15-minute devotion. It's pretty low effort, I'll admit. We open with a hymn, and we have some scripture, a very short reflection, and then Mark, our organist, often plays the organ. And that's about it. And we have it on our Facebook page, and anybody can access it. And so that's a good anchor.
How long?
I apologize.
That's all right. How long do those services, those devotional services run?
They're just about 15 to 20 minutes, so they're not terribly long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been having fun doing that.
I should have said, John, our buildings are closed down also, except for essential people that stop by, which is a very striking thing to me. I've thought about just how historically remarkable that is, that all of our houses of worship are closed right now. It says a lot about how unprecedented this time is. But
yeah, one of the things I think that. Go ahead, Erin.
Sorry, I just wanted to add just two things that Meredith jarred in my memory. So we had our Passover. We had our Passover holiday last month in April, and we did something this community has never done before. We did a live virtual Zoom Passover Seder with all three of the Knoxville community rabbis, and we live streamed it. We had probably around 500 people.
Wow.
That chimed in through either Facebook or through Zoom, which was really great to be able to do that, and to be able to work with the other, like Meredith mentioned about the Presbyterian churches coming together. It is amazing how we're able to, all of our religious communities come together during this time. It's pretty remarkable. Gives us something to look forward to when we go back to our quote unquote normal lives.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
That's right. One of the things which I suspect is true in each of your congregations is one of the important elements of worship is the opportunity to come together and see dear friends that you have in the congregation. And they really are dear friends, and they get to be very important people in your lives. And all of a sudden, you're sort of separated from them. And I think for some folks that's difficult. And have you all thought about that? Is there anything that one can do about that? It's not a puzzle I've been able to solve, although I've been thinking about it, because I miss a lot of people, and I think they do too. So, John, what do you think?
Well, I think that's one of the most difficult things about this, even for me. I mean, I don't, as Erin said, I think most of us are still working pretty hard in lots of different ways and taking on also a new context. So it drains you somewhat, and I don't get the energy that I normally get from being with people. And Zoom is great, but it's not the same. And I'm certainly hearing that from a lot of people, especially now as this thing goes on. I'm starting to hear people are struggling more. It's getting harder, I think. So there's not an easy answer, honestly. There's not an easy answer to that. Well,
particularly since it may run on a while, a lot longer than some people seem to think it will. That's my hunch. Meredith, how have you addressed that issue?
Well, it's not easy at all. There's no good solution. I make a lot more phone calls than I used to. I mean, there's an intentionality there that we really have to reach out to those, especially those that were already homebound. You know, it gives you a sense of, you know, we've been living in isolation or quarantining for just a couple of months, but some of our homebound people are living as if they are that way all the time. And so we're especially trying to reach out to those members. I've developed teams of people that are calling all of our congregation, especially those 60 and over, to check in on them. I challenged our Presbyterian women's circles to adopt those that are in the healthcare professions that are members, and they're sending care packages and cards and stuff like that. So this Sunday we're having our graduate, our senior, our graduate recognition Sunday, and so on our kids Zoom call, we all made cards that say congratulations, graduates, to try and engage them. So we're trying to be creative in the ways that we interact, but there's certainly an intentionality that has to be had. And so every time I talk to any members, I ask them, I said, we want to know how you're doing, and we want to know what you know about other members. If there are people that are struggling, please let us know, because we do have a lot of members, so that we can be intentional and make sure everybody is doing okay.
Rabbi Boxt mentioned one innovation that was done amongst the Hebrew congregations here in Knoxville. Is there anything else that one could quickly cite that strikes you as an innovation that may endure once we sort of stumble back to normal? Rabbi Boxt, yeah.
First of all, I want to make sure that they're Jewish congregations, not Hebrew congregations, Jewish congregations here in town.
Right.
No apology, no necessary. But one certain innovation we've been trying, I should say there's a group of us at the temple that have been trying to get live streaming services in our congregation pretty much for the 3 years that I've been here in town. And we've had, you know, some pushback with regards to privacy. I mean, good reasons, nothing, you know, privacy, cost, and this and that, the equipment. But I'm hearing now from a lot of my congregants we could never be in services before. We're so much more enjoying these Friday night services because we can be together and the numbers are so much better. You know, what about it? Can't you bring your computer and put it on the pulpit next to you and live Zoom, you know, every single Friday night, even when we're back in the building? So there is that sense of modernizing our worship moving forward, even after the pandemic is over.
Yeah.
Same here, I think, on that. I'm hearing the same kind of thing from people, that we need to continue this, especially because probably when we're first able to gather for who knows how long, not everyone is going to feel comfortable gathering at that point, and a lot of people shouldn't probably. So we're going to need to do it for quite a long time, I think, just through this pandemic, but people want to do it afterward too.
Let me ask a question that we could devote several hours to answering, but we've got about 5 minutes, so bear that in mind. But I think it's a question worth asking, so I'm going to ask it. On this past Sunday, the New York Times had an interesting article on how religious practice in America has been changing. Some of you may have seen it. One sentence caught my eye, and it is this sentence: "The pandemic has made it all too clear that both liberal and conservative visions of American life, based on self-fulfillment, the liberation to pursue one's desires, is not enough. It turns out we need each other, and we need each other dearly." From your respective faith traditions, how do you respond to this observation?
Well, being the oldest religion here, I'll speak first. I think that there's so many different ways that we can answer that question or respond to that comment. Whether you're talking about political views, conservative versus liberal, whether you're talking about religious connection or action, the way that whether someone's a liberal participant or a conservative participant with regards to the amount of practice that they do, the customs, the traditions. I think that the most important thing that I have learned from this whole pandemic and going right along with that article is how important every single person is. I'm writing my sermon for this week, and I'm talking about the 7 o'clock clap fest or cheer fest every single day that happens in New York City as people are going back to their work or going back to their homes from work. It really does show the vitality of and the importance of every one of us in this world.
Amen.
Any sort of 1 minute comment from John or Meredith?
Meredith. Go ahead, Meredith.
Well, that's hard. I come from what I would call a very purple church. We span the political spectrum on both ends. And so I feel like we are trying to live into what Christ has called us to do, is to be welcoming to all people. And even we're trying to be even more intentional in that matter. So our sort of motto or logo has always been to serve Christ in the heart of Knoxville. And so we try to live into that. And so that's my hope, that coming out of this, that the new normal that perhaps we settle into, because there's no going back to the old normal. We know that. A new normal might be that we consider those, especially our neighbors who are poor and living in desperate situations, that those cracks in society have now been lifted up, and that perhaps now they will be what we really focus on, regardless of political affiliation, that these are the people that we need to be helping, and that we can recognize that God calls us to work towards justice and ensuring that our neighbors thrive regardless of what party we come from. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, that is the opportunity that will be there,
Yeah.
if we can gather ourselves sufficiently and focus enough to seize it. John, any final thoughts?
Well, I agree with both of my colleagues here, and I will say that my final thought is that the Protestant religious tradition, especially end of the spectrum that I come out of, has over the years tended to be a very intellectual tradition in a way, and belief has resided in the head a lot. And for me, this just emphasizes the heart, that our worship needs to be a lot more about heart, and meaning love for our neighbors, love for one another, care for each other, and practice, more about love and practice. So
very good. Well, let me just I forgot to start my stopwatch, and that was a serious error on my part. But I think we're more or less at the end of things, and I know the time has gone very quickly. And I'm just told by our mysterious person out there, we got 5 minutes left.
Oh, awesome.
So
yeah, there's a counter on the top of the screen. It says remaining meeting time 5 minutes and 25 seconds. And it's counting down. Okay.
Yeah, good. Well, then we'll use up all but about 10 seconds of it. So this let's go back to that observation I just threw out there, because it's really how we come out of this is going to be so important. You think back, there have been times like this where, I'm old enough, I think probably the only one amongst you who is, that I remember what we did after World War II and the challenges that were there after World War II, not just in terms of our country, but the world. And they were enormous challenges. And yet we met them, and we met them with Harry Truman, somebody who never thought he would amount to much of anything. He stepped up, and we had the tremendous leadership from a number of people in this country to establish NATO and all of the institutions that have kept the peace all these years. But we responded to the terrible needs that were present at the end of World War II, the hunger and the suffering and the dislocations of millions of people and the terrible consequences of the Holocaust. All of these things were there, and they were all there at the same time. And yet somehow we summoned the will and the courage and the intelligence and the determination to deal with them. And I'm not comparing where we are with those years, because those years were much, much worse in many ways. But by the same token, what we've been going through is a lot worse than most people who are alive today have ever gone through. And so I'm very hopeful. I'm an optimist on these matters. But many, many years ago, I worked for Hubert Humphrey, and he was an optimist. He was a liberal, but he was also down to earth, and he looked at the future with hope and optimism, and that's what I've always done. So I'm hopeful we can do that again. But it's going to take a lot of effort. It ain't going to just happen automatically.
I think one of the personality traits you're going to find in most members of the, as we're called, is an optimism. It's almost a requirement in our positions. Even in the darkest of times, we have to find to be optimistic. If nothing else, to look towards God, look towards our religious identity, to find that. And I think back to 9/11, the worst thing that happened in our country since or from before the pandemic. And I think of how quickly our country came back. I think of how quickly the people in our country surrounded each other and put politics aside and, really rebounded. And I have to believe that that's going to happen again, regardless of our political or other differences, that we're going to come back together and be stronger. If I didn't feel that way, I wouldn't be a very good rabbi.
Yeah. Well said. Meredith, you have any? We're down to 1 minute and 47 seconds, I am told.
Well, I certainly can reiterate what Erin has been saying, that hope is what is driving us forward, and I believe that the God that we worship is around us and working through us, and will transform this situation into something that maybe we can't even imagine. And hopefully it will be lifting up those, especially who have been suffering from poverty or oppression of some sort, and that we can unite and recognize that we're all human, and that we can be united together.
Well, that is certainly we all share that hope. I know that our congregations share that hope, and but we've got some work to do, and
We do.
These things just don't happen. And some of us have been around for a long time trying to work on these things, and I guess we're just going to have to hang in there a little longer. So anyway, the time has disappeared, as it always does on these 30-minute programs. But I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank the viewers for watching, and I hope this has been enlightening and challenging and worthwhile. And if that's the case, then we'll say we've spent a productive 30 minutes. So I think it's an insightful discussion of faith in action. So let me just say to all of you, good night, and for heaven's sakes, stay safe. Thank you.